All right, I think we can begin. So welcome. Welcome to the media call for the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland. My name is Iman Freeman. I'm Executive Director of Baltimore Action Legal Team, and I'll be your virtual hostess for this call. We will be recording this call, so we will make it available to any media that were unable to make it today. Before we begin, just very quickly, wanted to just reiterate that the People's Commission was established for the express purpose to reduce the disparate impact on the justice system on youth and adults who have been historically targeted and marginalized by local and state criminal and juvenile laws based on their race, gender, disability, and socioeconomic status. Today, we have a lot of members of the committee who have graciously given us their time to explain some of the great work that we've been doing since January, and also to also explain our next steps as we move towards to 2021. So I will begin by this slide, and I'm not going to go over every organization on this slide, but I think that this slide depicts just the wonderful diversity that we have in the organizations that are supporting this effort, and you'll hear from many. Some of the organizations that we have listed on here, you'll hear from some of the representatives from those organizations. And we also have built in some time at the end to take any questions. And so up next, I'm going to turn it over to Tara to discuss why the need for a People's Commission. Tara?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I join Iman in thanking all of you for being here on this morning, or this afternoon. So why a People's Commission? We know that there have been lots of state task force and commission, and those of us who do work in Annapolis know that commissions and task forces and study groups are places where good legislation goes to die. But we have two overarching purposes for establishing a People's Commission at this particular time. One, we know that in 2019, a task force to study crime classification and penalties was established via state legislation. And the charge of this group is to look at the Maryland Criminal Code and make determination about whether some offenses should be revised and whether the penalty that is attached to those offenses should be revised down or revised up. The task force is one of the goals of the task force is to try to bring some equity to the way the criminal code is imposed. But the configuration of the task force does not include any advocates. It does not include any community leaders, and it does not include any impacted persons. And even to the extent that the task force is holding public hearings, when it comes to actual decision-making power, that power does not lie in the hands of communities, and particularly people who are being most impacted by Maryland's current criminal code. Therefore, the approach, the scope of that task force is limited, and then the approach the task force has taken is not going to get us to a result that truly reflects racial equity. At the same time that that task force was created, there was also a Juvenile Justice Reform Council created to look at Maryland's current juvenile services system and make recommendations for how that system needs to be improved and maybe in some respects fundamentally reformed. That is good work that's going on within that council. There are advocate and impacted voices that are able to inform the final decisions of that council. But that council is not looking at the juvenile code. That council, the scope of that council is not to look at what is bringing young people to the attention of police, courts, and corrections in the first place, and do we need to revisit what offenses are currently on the books and eliminate those offenses because we are essentially criminalizing young people in ways that don't have anything to do with their safety or with public safety. And so I and others felt it necessary to sort of finish the work and expand the work of these two bodies and do so in a way that instead of relying on state actors with the support of community leaders to sort of say which direction our justice system needs to move, to flip that and to say, no, it's the people. It is the people who live in these communities. It is the people and families who are being most impacted by Maryland current criminal law and juvenile law to say, these laws are disproportionately impacting populations that have historically been marginalized, and that target populations not because they're a public safety risk, but because of their identity. Something that has everything to do with who they are and not necessarily what they're doing. So I will then talk about what do we mean when we say decriminalization. So I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Let me just go ahead and do this now. The decriminalization, well, what makes us different is that we are a diverse community of people, and this commission does not have any state actors. So there are no state's attorneys, there are no police, there are no judges, there are no corrections officials, there are no public defenders. Everyone who is a member of the commission is someone who has had direct lived experience with the issues that we're tackling, or they are family members of folks, or they are advocates who have dedicated their lives and their careers to lifting up civil rights and human rights. And so we are looking to and relying on the voices of these communities, anti-poverty advocates, harm reduction activists, Black Lives Matter activists, members of the LGBTQ community, and many, many other communities, youth, looking to those communities and those populations to do a comprehensive review of the Maryland criminal and juvenile codes and identify which laws are currently on the books that are bringing marginalized populations into contact with the police in disproportionate numbers, and which of those laws need to either be revised or eliminated altogether to truly achieve race and other equity in our current justice system. So with that, I'll pass it back.
All right, and Shanta Jackson will cover the goals and objectives.
Yes, thank you. And as Tara mentioned, the goal of the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland is to, one, dramatically reduce the number of unnecessary and unjust arrests, prosecutions, convictions, incarceration, and collateral consequences that are based on a personal identity, race, gender, disability, and or socioeconomic status of that person. And by socioeconomic status, think about your level of income, the neighborhood that you live in, your access to education, your level in society, whether you're class, poverty, different things like that. So that's what we mean by socioeconomic status. And then also to, the second goal is to disrupt the ability of state and local criminal codes to target and incarcerate Black and brown bodies through the use of the criminal justice system. And three, dramatically increase the use of alternative intervention and response strategies that address issues of public safety and social justice through an anti-racism lens. And then four, to influence the shifting narrative of public safety priorities from a criminal focus to an actual public health focus. And then going back to that first goal of the commission when we talked about based on a person's personal identity, race, gender, disability, and socioeconomic status, that is a public health focus. And that's our public health lens and also our anti-racism lens. Next slide, please. And so how are we doing the work? The People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland is, as Tara mentioned, we are conducting an extensive review of the current state and local criminal codes. And these codes that we're looking at, they result in the unnecessary arrest of individuals based on, again, personal identity, the physical location of their body, and their socioeconomic status. And then after we identify these codes, we will, and this is something that we're actually working on right now, we're in progress, to make recommendations for which offenses should be reclassified and which behaviors and conduct should be decriminalized altogether, and which systems other than the justice system should be the primary or sole responder. And then in addition to making the recommendations, we are, one of our goals and what we're working on now is where we will execute a lobbying strategy to implement the recommendations agreed upon by the commission. And we plan to begin that, our more aggressive lobbying in 2021. And then create and implement a communication strategy that influences the state and local discourse on public safety, hence what we're doing right now. And then it's important for us to be able to evaluate the work that we've done and to assess its effectiveness of the commission efforts. And then also it's important for us to evaluate so that we can make improvements moving forward. And then there may be opportunity for this commission to serve as a model for the rest of the country. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shanta. So we are now, Sarah, going to go over by just what we mean by decriminalization. Sarah?
Thank you, Iman, and I'm sorry for the confusion earlier. You can see I'm really excited about this effort. And so when we say decriminalization, what we're talking about is the elimination of policies, as well as practices that we're able to reveal that expose marginalized communities to increased police and justice involvement. Again, not because they're of a legitimate public safety concern, but primarily because of behaviors and conduct that arise from that person's status or identity. And decriminalization also includes, as Shanta said, the implementation. So we're not just looking to get rid of, we're also looking to put in its place the implementation of policies and practices that do not rely on police, courts, and corrections to respond to this category of behaviors and conduct. Each of the working groups will sort of begin to sort of lift up some of the things that they are focused on and the goals of those specific working groups. But to be really clear, what is increasingly clear and increasingly clear to even the quote unquote everyday American is that there are people who are being targeted by the police, who are being approached by the police, who are encountering the police on a daily basis behind behaviors and conduct and simple presence that has nothing to do with public safety. People are being approached because they're standing somewhere someone has decided they should not be standing. They're walking somewhere someone has decided they should not be walking. We know that there is the phenomena of young people, particularly young people of color, who are not being given the benefit of their youth. And thus they're coming in contact with the justice system because someone has said that because you're Black and you're brown, your behavior is criminogenic. It's not about adolescent brain development. It's not about any trauma or poverty that you are encountering. You are doing this because you're just a criminal. And there are, we see that with the LGBTQ population. We see that with the homeless population. We see that with populations that are struggling with poverty. And so when we speak of decriminalization, usually, or in the beginning, decriminalization was specific to drug policy, and we do have a robust drug policy working group that is going to push that envelope even further. But we are talking about large scale and broad scale decriminalization of populations of people who have historically been marginalized, historically been discriminated against, and who need to be freed and liberated from the clutches of a law enforcement structure and our current criminal and juvenile justice systems, because they're not public safety threats. And that system should have absolutely nothing to do with those populations. And so with that, I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Tara. And I think that that was a great segue into, just one, understanding what we mean by decriminalization, and then two, how did we organize this work so that we can truly have a more robust and comprehensive product at the end of this. And so right now, the way that the commission operates, we largely do most of the work in work groups. And we have 5 work groups, which is drug policy, homelessness, poverty, sex work, and youth. And today we have the leads from each of these work groups that are going to provide us with just a snapshot of what we've been working on for the past couple of months, and also the outcomes that we hope to address in each working group. So I am going to turn it over to drug policy, Tricia, to talk about drug policy.
Hi, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Tricia Christensen. I am the policy manager with Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition and have been helping to lead the drug policy work group. There was a good introduction already to sort of broadly what we are talking about. We're still sort of looking through and thinking about exactly the codes that we want to, or exactly how we want to change various codes, but we largely are looking at the issue of economic violence through how cash bail is applied to folks, and want to remove or reduce the use of this as much as possible. We are looking at how many drug-related offenses the punishments escalate as there are recurring offenses, and how to eliminate that from happening. When looking at drug distribution charges, we'd like to be able to establish a higher standard of proof. So rather than focusing only on volume, that law enforcement and courts should have to give a higher standard of proof to show that it is distribution and not simple possession or for personal use. There are many offenses that could be reclassified to take away a felony charge and maybe turn it down to a misdemeanor. So looking through what that could look like. And then when it comes to drug use alone or drug possession alone, removing legal penalties associated with that at all. So looking at those kind of overarching issues, certainly the economic violence piece, thinking about possession and manufacturing, how in real life those things can be more complicated than it looks on paper. So again, a personal use amount really varies depending on the individual. So having to prove of manufacturing and distribution from having a higher standard of proof for that. We are in the midst of a nationwide discussion about the role of law enforcement right now. And part of that conversation, we believe, in the drug policy work group has to be a conversation about what the laws are that law enforcement is being asked to enforce. So when we think about the war on drugs, it's always been a war on people, especially people of color and low-income people. And now more than ever, we believe that in Maryland, we have to divest away from a carceral approach to drug use and invest more in harm reduction and other forms of community mutual aid, so we can focus on building systems of care that are non-judgmental and that are person-centered. And we think that all of these nationwide discussions we are having are incredibly timely for the work that we're doing here with the commission. I mean, we really think it's the perfect time to be having these conversations about what this looks like for us locally. Can hand it over to the next work group.
Sure, Tricia, thank you so much. So we are going to move forward with homelessness, and I believe we have Gabby speaking. She's leading the homelessness work group.
Had it muted. Hi, my name is Gabriela Sevilla. I work at Homeless Persons Representation Project, the co-chair of the homelessness work group, along with my friend Munib. And yeah, honored to lead the group. I'm a person with lived experience with hunger and homelessness, and especially it's very timely with the waves of homelessness we might see now due to the pandemic and current crisis. Now more than ever, super critical to tackle our goals, and our goals mostly overarching is tackling, reducing the harm of criminalizing people who have to live their private lives in public. as you may know, like we might be able to go in our home and sleep in our bed, but someone sleeping on the street, they actually may be criminalized for doing the same thing, just being unhoused and doing so. So we have our overarching issues, you know, housing stability, behavioral health, as you know, like many folks experiencing homelessness also experience, you know, symptoms of PTSD from life on the street or from being criminalized in jail as well, and making sure to reduce those police interactions with alternatives as well is something we really strive for, and is one of our goals, to like eliminate encounters between law enforcement and individuals experiencing homelessness. And we also look to, you know, reduce and eliminate barriers to stable housing and employment, recognizing that, you know, although we are the homelessness work group, we do have a lot of intersections with the drug policy group and the poverty group. And we also overall just seeking to restore dignity and respect to our neighbors experiencing homelessness. And yeah, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to poverty, and we have Christopher.
Yes, my name is Christopher Dews. I'm a policy advocate for the Job Opportunities Task Force, and I'm also the current lead of the Decriminalize Poverty work group. A lot of our motivations and goals are actually stemmed from JOTF's 2018 report, The Criminalization of Poverty, in which we explore the multiplicity of intersections in which Marylanders, specifically Black men and women, come into contact with the criminal justice system for the fatal crime of just being poor. The report focuses on the common pathways into the criminal justice system, disparate treatment that people go through while they're in the system via fines and fees, and the collateral consequences that come with having a criminal record and being a part of the criminal justice system. 5 specific areas, I guess 6 technically, that we're looking into are current motor vehicle laws. So this is things like affordable auto insurance, which are things like how when you are in a specific location, zip code wise, your auto insurance skyrockets, and it specifically hammers people of color. And knowing with the state of Maryland, you have to be able to have insurance to be able to drive, or else it's an arrestable offense. It's a huge problem for us. Pretrial fines and fees, the fact that many people who are incarcerated have not even been convicted of a crime, but are stuck in incarceration for the sole purpose that they couldn't pay for home monitoring. We're looking into that as well. We're also looking into expungement expansion. We understand that if a person gets released from incarceration, they need to be able to move on with their lives and be able to get employment. But once a person has a record for everything from no access to employment, to the inability to have higher education, to the inability to be able to purchase housing or get bank loans, these things tend to now recriminalize somebody and force them to stay into poverty. There's also debtors' prisons, which are supposed to be illegal in Maryland. But right now, if you owe a civil debt, the state can act, the creditor, forgive me, the creditor can actually put out a body attachment against you and have you rearrested simply to pay off that fine. So these are just some of the ways that we are investigating intersections between being poor and being criminalized. And we're looking into codes that are going to try to eliminate those methodologies for the greater sake of people in the state of Maryland. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Christopher. And we'll move on to sex work. So.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gasso Goba. I'm the lead for the Sex Work Working Group and also the volunteer chapter coordinator for Sex Workers Outreach Project here in Baltimore City. So the Sex Work Working Group, our goal is to identify state and city laws that negatively impact people in the sex trade, including those engaged in survival sex work, and advocate for the introduction of policies that will decriminalize, which means the removal of criminal penalties, and decarcerate, which means release from the criminal justice system, sex workers to destigmatize the sex trade. Now, some of the overarching issues regarding sex work is labor rights and structural and institutional violence. Now, what do we mean by structural and institutional violence? Well, there was a really great study that was released a couple of years back by Johns Hopkins called the Sapphire Study. And in the Sapphire Study, 313 sex workers in Baltimore reported that 82 of them had been arrested. 33% reported that they exchanged information, money, or sex to police officers to avoid arrest. 85% had been homeless. 35% report engaging in sex work to have a place to stay. 51% report experiencing intimate partner violence. 53% reported going to bed hungry at least once a week. And so the issue of sex work, right? Why are people in Maryland, people who are disabled, who are migrants, who are transgender, genderqueer, working class, indigenous folk, why do they feel like their only option to survive in Maryland is to engage in sex work? Well, predominantly it is because of the structural and institutional violence that is not only historic, but is current and systematic, continually going on right now. There is a really great piece that Free State Justice put out in 2016 called The Blueprint for Change, which is a needs assessment for LGBTQ Marylanders. And they found a significant portion of folks, specifically genderqueer and transgender folks, are facing employment discrimination and sexual violence and harassment in their workplace. Now, I tell you, how are people supposed to engage in traditional work if they are continually being misgendered, if they are continually being harassed, right? If that were me, I would rather work in a shadow economy like sex work. Another thing that I would also like to lift up is that we have identified right now 11 codes at the state level and the Baltimore City level that we are going to be challenging and lifting up through this work. And one of them that I want to highlight is loitering for the intent of prostitution, which literally is just being poor, taking the bus, walking while trans, walking while Black, right? These are the intersectional issues that we are tackling in the sex work working group, and saying that any policies, any laws that impact people in the sex trade and our clients need to include us. We are very much demanding the decriminalization, decarceration, and destigmatization of sex work. I'll pass it on to the next working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Gusau. And so our last work group that we have today is the youth work group, and I believe we have Ashley and Hannah.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ashley Devon, and I'm the Youth Justice Policy Director at Advocates for Children and Youth. Advocates for Children and Youth builds a strong Maryland by advancing policies and programs to ensure every child of every race, ethnicity, and place of birth is able to achieve their full potential. The People's Commission represents a critical opportunity for a broad coalition of organizations and individuals to stop the criminalization of adolescent behavior and to eliminate as well as reform statutes that have overwhelmingly targeted and systemically disenfranchised Black and Brown youth. The youth work group, which is led by Kendra Marsh and myself, brings together experienced advocates, individuals with prior experience with the Maryland's youth justice system and youth. Our work group with the People Commission is focused on identifying and recommending changes to the Maryland's Juvenile Code and other codes that impact young people under the age of 18. Our work group works in partnership with other advocacy efforts throughout the state, such as the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition, and is focused on structural changes to state law that will end the ability to use the justice system to target youth of color, youth with disabilities, LGBTQ plus youth, homeless youth, and other vulnerable youth in Maryland. Some of the codes that the youth work group have been reviewing are statutes that allow officials to file court cases against youth for what are called status offenses. These are behaviors that are only categorized as offenses because a young person is under the age of 18. They include skipping school, being disobedient at home, or running away. The youth work group is also looking at creating a strong presumption in Maryland law that youth should be diverted from the legal system altogether. In many situations, recognizing the justice system is inherently traumatic to youth and far less effective at helping young people or promoting public safety than diverting young people to services and supports in the community. Maryland law does not currently allow for diversion in certain circumstances, but it is discretionary, which also means it is subject to bias against its use for Black and Brown youth. The youth work group is learning from the young people who have been mobilizing to reform the justice system throughout the state, and we are directly engaging those young people. And we look forward to continuing our work and really bringing reform to this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. So I think hopefully that gave, that just helped you with a deeper understanding of the issues that we're going to tackle in this final report. Now we're going to move over to actually the report format and just an overview of what we're hoping the interim report will look like in January. So I'm going to pass it over to Shanta.
Yes, so with all of the codes and the overarching issues that were just presented, the plan is to kind of combine this, right? And we mentioned that we'll have our final report with recommendations, and then also that advocacy and lobbying strategy that we will implement as well in 2021. And so our interim report will include, of course, information about the issue similar to what we've done today. And then also, in addition to the issue, any policy recommendations. And these policy recommendations could address how the code can be created or revised to reduce the outcome of unjust and unnecessary arrest of individuals. Or the policy recommendations could be not necessarily creating or revising. It could just be to eliminate the certain code or statute altogether. And then, but it's also important for us to detail what the policy implications would be. And when we're looking at the policy implications, we're thinking about, how will this policy change or these policy changes improve the current situation? And then, who should be the sole responder? That would, but we're also using a comprehensive approach, and we're looking at the possible intended and unintended consequences. So we're using a very, again, a comprehensive approach to the consideration for policy implications. And then outcomes. And I kind of mentioned this with the consequences, but what negative results could come from making this change, what arguments are likely to be brought up. So yes, we are anticipating what potential opposition would say, but we are prepared to explain why the recommendations from the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland is a true representation of the people in the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Shanta. And so I think the next question is largely time. Where do we see, how long is this going to take, and where do we hope to, the time that it takes for us to develop this? And so we will have a full commission meeting, which is just an internal meeting with all of us next week to kind of continue to talk through much of the work that has been done. And to truly make this a statewide effort, we're going to have some regional listening sessions, and that's going to be, as you can see, the dates that are listed there, that mentioned on the slide. We're also going to be intentional about the legislative advocacy piece to this, and then hopefully after we have all of the inputs, we'll work on drafting a report. And then probably in January, having an interim report ready for the legislative session. So that's where we are as far as timeline. And that's pretty much our presentation for today. These are all of our social media accounts. And so the website is decrimmaryland.org. And all of the social media accounts are Decrim Maryland. And so I'll pause here for any questions that you all may have.
Hi, this is Sadie Rose Stern with JPI. I just want to throw out a question to really any of the folks in the work groups. All of our lives are really busy and crazy and insane. Can you say a little bit about why this is important enough to you to take time away from everything else that's your responsibility and come and participate in the commission?
This is Ashley Devon, and I would like to take that first. So I think this is very important because we have to acknowledge where we are as a country, and we also have to acknowledge the historic landscape that we've existed in. Maryland incarcerates more emerging adults than any other state. We lead Arkansas and Alabama. And if we do not change the desperate outcomes of certain groups of individuals in the state, we will continue the systemic disenfranchisement of individuals. So this is not just an issue of should we focus on it. It is an issue of urgency that we must, and that this work must be done. Since COVID, we have been very diligent, and we are going to continue to fight and press on. So I don't think, for me, it is not a can we, should we, how do we identify time. It is we must. And I'm saying that as a person who has a brother who's currently incarcerated, who came home by freshman year from college, and all the males who grew up in my community were incarcerated. And if I chose to have a son, and when I look at my niece and my nephews, I don't want them to be incarcerated or forced into a system solely because of the way in which they look. I think that we need to make sure that we protect the lives of youth in this state and protect the lives of children throughout Maryland. And so for me, it is a sense of urgency that we must all do it. It is our call to action. And especially building on Congressman John Lewis's passing this weekend, it is time for us to get in some good trouble.
Yeah, I definitely like to second that and I guess share some of the reasons why I engage in this work. I do identify as a sex worker. I've been a sex worker for the last 4 years, providing for myself within this neoliberal capitalist state. So I have enough time to not only engage in a lot of the volunteer work that I do, but to also address the trauma, not only from my own individual life, but the ancestral trauma that I also carry, right? And so I think that this work, especially the work that I do within the Sex Work Working Group and within SWAP Baltimore, is very much to address why do people feel like their only option is to sell sex in Maryland, in this country, and in this world. What structures in place have been historically failing Black and Brown, Indigenous, queer, trans folk, migrants, and what structures are currently failing us? I find that I come to this work of privilege. And so because of my privilege, the little privilege that I have, I am charged, as Ashley said, to engage this work, not only for myself, but for others who do not have the capacity to engage this work because they are straight-based sex workers, or they are currently incarcerated, or they do not feel like they have a voice because they are dealing with internalized shame and stigma that has been placed upon them by the institutions and the morals of this country merely for surviving. And so that is why I come to this work.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to echo, folks who are part of this commission are passionate and driven. We make time because we know it's just, it's fair, it's basic human rights we're talking about. I like hear and feel a lot of folks like, personal connections, and, you don't, other stuff is going on all the time, but this is life or death, right? Like, what happens with police interactions, if that's, part of the work we're doing is to reduce that. What happens in prisons and in jails? This has to be done, and it will be, and we have some pretty passionate and amazing leaders working to make that happen.
Yeah, this is Chris Hughes of JOTF. The reason why I'm a part of this specifically is really two major reasons. One, JOTF has been doing this work for going on a decade now, and a lot of our partners are also doing this work. So we can actually move a lot faster and have a much heavier lift if we're all on the same page and we're all working towards the same goals. And this is also going to expose those issues so that people can really understand why is it that so many people in specific communities, specifically of specific colors, are having so many issues? Is it just because of a lack of ambition or hard work or attitude? Or is it more systemic issues? And I think when you get down to specific codes that are actually exposing a lot of these problems, I mean, if we can resolve just more than a few of these issues, you could literally transform the entire state and uplift millions of Marylanders. So I see it as a scope issue. I think there's a lot of things going on, of course, in the world, and people are incredibly busy. But this specific work can like legitimately transform America. I'm sorry, I would say America can transform Maryland if it is done properly and if it actually is executed upon. So that's the way I see it. I think it's just a huge undertaking that can be incredibly fruitful in its work.
Thank you for that. I think that is definitely what we just heard is also one of the reasons that makes this commission needed and unique, and definitely sets us apart from other efforts. Any other questions?
What are your expectations as a result of this work as it relates to our elected officials in the state of Maryland?
I guess I'll answer that first. For me, Christopher Hughes, once again, JOTF. At best, policy change, clearly. Policy change, and at worst, and this is also pretty good, moving the Overton window to give legislators the ammunition that they need to be able to intellectually and articulately make the case for a lot of our policy proposals, especially when it comes to decriminalizing poverty. The way I've known politicians my entire life is they don't really care unless you force them to care. And I think it's rather dangerous to have so many legislators who may not even understand or be connected to the real situations that are happening to many constituents, because they may not even be in those communities, but may be on that committee, let's say judiciary, but are not connected to where people are really being incarcerated unnecessarily. I think that with this information going towards legislators, I think that we can now expect, even if legislative change does not happen, that we'll have a more educated legislative populace, that even if it's next year or the year after that, we'll be able to move a lot stronger because the groundwork is already set. The information is out there, and those who are on the committee will be much more knowledgeable about our predicaments. So that's my expectation, best and worst.
This is Tara Huffman with OSI Baltimore. So I have sort of two expectations that I will lift up. We conceived of the People's Commission. We sort of first issued invitations to the People's Commission back in the early fall of 2019, well before COVID-19, before the killing of George Floyd, which set off the actions and protests that sustained actions and protests that we are seeing around the nation, and conceived of the need to pursue decriminalization in Maryland with real urgency, because even as we look to whether it's reform the police, defund the police, divest, invest, we have to acknowledge that as long as there are laws and ordinances and policies on the book that give law enforcement license to interfere, to interact, to approach someone, then we're never going to achieve the kind of policing transformation that many of us and that Americans, I think, across the nation are increasingly looking for. So we have to exit the police from people's lives in a way that they are currently entangled in people's lives and in issues. Even the police themselves will say that they are being asked to be the master of too much. They're being asked to do too much. They're being asked to intervene when someone is having a mental health crisis. They're being asked to intervene when a child is acting out in school. They're being asked to intervene because someone is uncomfortable with the presence of someone who is not like them. And so as long as there is a law, as long as there is an offense, as long as there's a crime in a criminal code, in a juvenile code, in a city ordinance that gives the police license to intervene in those situations, and that gives someone license to call 911 to ask the police to intervene in those situations, we're never going to get to the kind of safety, we're never going to get to the kind of justice system that I believe we all want. And connected to that, my second expectation is that at the same time that we're looking to transform the justice system and what we consider to be appropriate intervention for police, courts, and corrections, my other expectation is that we would use this as an opportunity to also educate the public and to re-educate the public about why do we call 911 when we call 911, and what should we as a public, what should we as communities be doing instead to resolve issues without police involvement. So I'm hoping that we can have a serious transformation in what we're asking any part of the justice system to intervene in, and that would include a re-education and a conversation amongst us civilians, us everyday citizens, about what we want the police, courts, and corrections to be involved in, and what isn't appropriate for them to be involved in. And it's either not an issue, and so we should just leave it alone, or it's an issue that is better addressed through some non-police, non-justice response. Thank you.
And in honoring everyone's time, I have one final question, and please anyone answer this. What message, in addition to what Tara said about her expectation of working with the public, what message do you want to send to the people? What is something that you want the people to do, or you want the people to know?
This is Ashley Devon again. I would like to start on this. For me, it is important for everyone to know that there is hope. It's important for everyone to know that there are individuals who are giving their life and their professional careers to fight for a better day. It is important for individuals to know that this is a great state, and if we make the necessary changes, that everyone can live a life that can have equal opportunity. It is important to know that we want the people to know that we are fighting for an equitable Maryland, and that every single day we are working to change the outcomes of youth and children throughout this state, so that individuals will not be treated a particular way based on the way in which they look, or the zip code in which they live in, or the community that they live in, that everyone can have equal access to opportunity. And that is important for me, because I think we all need hope right now.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Trisha with the Drug Policy Work Group. This might be a bit of a reiteration of what other folks have said, but I think just thinking about people who are not directly impacted, and thinking of how to get them involved in these issues and to care about these issues, just broadly, like, it is possible to address the various problems in our society in a way that doesn't always include throwing people in jail. And I think that approaching everything from the carceral framework is really lazy, and it's what we've been doing for decades. And so it's really exciting that this commission is coming together to really put our heads together to think, like, within the system that we currently have, where are the changes that we can make to educate people on these issues, at the very least, as was mentioned earlier, and then to actually change our laws to allow for other kinds of interventions to become more normalized.
Perfect. Thank you for your responses, and thank you everyone on the call for your leadership in this state, and thank you for everyone who for all medias. I'm sorry, for all members of the media who joined. Thank you for sharing your interest. I'll pass it over to either Iman or Tara for closing remarks.
I'll just once again echo thanks to all the members of the commission who again took time out of their day to be a part of this presentation, and to those members of the media who also took time out of your day, because we know there's a lot of news happening these days, and so we appreciate you taking the time to learn more about what we're doing, and we welcome any additional questions, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and stay cool. Bye-bye.
Later.